On November 8, 1942, the invasion of North Africa began. Known as Operation Torch, it was a combined American and British attack against the Germans commanded by General Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. On May 13, 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered to the Allies in Tunisia. Over 275,000 German and Italians were taken prisoners of war. The color film you're viewing was shot by the United States Signal Corps. The men surrendered on foot, cars, and armored vehicles. Enlisted men, officers, they all gathered to go into captivity. There would have been an even greater amount of prisoners, but tens of thousands escaped into Italy. In the United States, plans had been put in place to create internment camps to keep these men. The idea was that the prisoners would be too far to try and escape and would also free needed men for the war effort. So the men were searched, questioned, and placed in temporary internment camps. Empty supply ships were filled with prisoners of war, and eventually over 425,000 men from Africa, Italy, and Europe sailed the 4,000 nautical miles to the United States. As a result of all these prisoners of war, there would be over 500 main and subcamps built throughout the United States. On this show, we're going to try and find the remains of these prisoner of war camps. The first camp we're going to look for is Camp Lordsburg in New Mexico. But first, how this all started. We're back on the road again, heading towards Lordsburg, New Mexico. Now, among the many souvenirs brought back from the Mediterranean front is this little book known as a soul book. Mostly an ID book, every German soldier had to carry one. In fact, the name for this show began with the discovery of this soul book. This one belonged to Air Force German soldier Hans Thiel. Here's some more information on this. The soul book is a soldier's pay book as well as his ID. Inside is a soldier's induction date, rank, parents, units he served in, pay scale, decorations, and much more. This unit page shows that Hans served in Italy and Africa. Hans was probably captured in Italy as he was awarded the Africa Cuff title, and these were given out after the surrender of the Afrika Korps. The Cuff title was an award for service in Africa. What is unique about this document is this typed note glued inside the front cover, indicating he was a prisoner of war in Mejia, Texas. There is another reference to Mejia on page 15. We're ready to start our journey to find Camp Mejia. We're starting off on the west coast and we'll be traveling east as Mejia is about 100 miles south of Dallas, Texas. I drove on through Tucson and stopped at Lordsburg, New Mexico. There I found my first camp. Off the 10 freeway, Lordsburg is a small town with a population of about 3,000. I knew it had a museum and was told to look for the windmill in the center of town. It was easy to spot. The museum is located in the old Armory building at 708 East 2nd Street. It is open weekdays from 2 to 5. Off an old farm, the windmill was brought in piece by piece. In front of the museum is this World War II anti-aircraft gun. And keeping it company is this M42A1 anti-aircraft dual-gun armored vehicle. It has two 40mm guns. Having seen the outside, I decided to go in. Inside, the displays feature old home, farm, and ranch items. All of these antiques were donated by local citizens. There is even a military room prepared by Art de la Garza and friends. The main attraction at the museum is a prisoner of war camp display. The display was organized by Molly Pressler, her husband, and many volunteers. Mrs. Pressler is a recognized authority on the prisoner of war camp, which was located east of Lordsburg. I was fortunate to meet Molly. She has done enormous amounts of research on the camp and was instrumental in organizing and placing the display regarding Lordsburg Camp Days.
My name is Molly Pressler. I live in Lordsburg, New Mexico. We've been here since 1972. Well, before the war, Lordsburg was like any other peaceful, American-loving town in America, but then when war was declared, December the 7th, 1941, then our men were being sent overseas. Things changed forever. Then in February of 1942, the Chamber of Commerce received word that this would be the site of a 3,000-man cantonment, Army cantonment camp. People poured into town to work to build the camp, and they built over, I think it was like 262 buildings in less than 2 years. Now all this time, The people of Lordsburg are trying to find out what's going on because we're a small town. We want to know what's going on. They could not find out from the engineer or any of the Army men that were here. It wasn't until about a week before the first Japanese internees came that they found out that this was going to house Japanese enemy aliens. These men had been watched by the FBI and been ascertained to be potentially dangerous. They lived on the West Coast, Alaska, California, some were from Hawaii, some were from Puerto Rico, Canada, Guam, other places. And so these men were being rounded up some the afternoon of December the 7th. Then they were all, Japanese enemy aliens were processed through the Lordsburg camp. I don't have any real numbers, but I estimate in excess of 2,500 since all the Japanese that came through here were later interned at Santa Fe and other places. Santa Fe had around 3,000.
As in all situations, evidence will survive. The attack in Pearl Harbor created an immediate prejudice against all Japanese people in the United States, including those that were American citizens. These newspapers were part of the internment program. They were found in a trash can 20 years ago. In California, people were rounded up and held at the Santa Anita racetrack where these papers were printed. They were printed in 1942 and tried to give the internees a semblance of normalcy in the most abnormal of times. The papers gave news of impending transfers, obligations required from the U.S. military, and other information. Another document is this letter from Mrs. Hirohata to Mr. Hosaka. In it she writes about her husband being sent to Camp Lordsburg. Shown here is his internee number. It is dated June 30th, 1942.
In June of 1942, that's when Lordsburg got its first shipment of Japanese. Now it's interesting how they were unloaded. They would first be sent to Lordsburg in a highball train, that means with no stops, and then taken to the Ulmarus siding east of town, usually in the middle of the night. And then with Army guards on both sides of the road, they would be marched to the camp, which would be a distance of about 3 miles. The camp was originally built to house 3,000 men. Each cantonment compound area, had 10 barracks. It would house 100 men each. They had its own mess hall, its own latrines, etc. When the Japanese were here, only one compound was used. When the Italians came later, these were actual prisoners of war captured in North Africa and Italy. 3,000 men were here because all 3 compounds were used. Now when the Germans were here in 1944 and 1945, the camp was overrun with non-cooperative, non-commissioned officers, the cast-offs of other German POW camps, and 5,500 Germans were housed at the camp. The JACL in Seattle asked me to find out what I could about the Japanese that had been buried at the camp. And I found that they were moved in 1946 to Fort Bliss Cemetery. They asked me to go over and take pictures. Hi, Margie. An arts and crafts fair that the Japanese had. I had it translated, and as I recall on the side it says made by Barracks 9 Company so-and-so, I forgot. On this end, it lists different things that would normally go into a toolbox, like screwdriver, hammer, measuring tools, and so on. And then, just to be sure, on this end, they put grindstone. And it's very nice. You've never done anything to it?
No. I think Mama put this green paint on, but she never covered the writing on it.
Well, they had wood shops there. A lot of men made everything. You said that they had made you some
little thongs or sandals.
Little sandals. How old were you at that time?
I must have been about 9, 10, 11 years old, somewhere along in there.
The Farm and Ranch Heritage Museum of New Mexico, situated in Las Cruces, became interested in the history of agriculture in New Mexico during World War II. And they found out that the prisoners were used in the fields. It was the prisoners who saved the cotton crops at that time because our men were overseas and there was a labor shortage. So then they came over to Lordsburg to see what we had over here. By that time I had been collecting artifacts and so forth for a long while and shared my information with them. And they enlisted my help in interviews, and as well as other people around New Mexico to interview former people who were situated with the prisoners of war in agriculture. And they made this exhibit, and it won a national award. It was one of 23 that won a national award. And it's called To Get the Job Done. It more or less gives you a feel of how it would be in World War II, be a prisoner of war, how it would be to live in the barracks. It has lots of pictures of them working in the fields and farmers and ranchers telling about the prisoners of war. And when the exhibit traveled to Texas and around, then it was time for it to be over. They offered it to us. And since we're a volunteer organization, we're strictly non-profit, they gave it to us free. And it is such a first-class exhibit. We're so fortunate to have it.
After the interview, Molly took me to go see the camp remains. We first went to POW Road, which is located right off the freeway. POW Road leads to the camp buildings. All these buildings are on private property, so we first asked for permission. We went to an area that contained a possible sewage disposal plant and a still-used fire department truck garage. After the war, the camp buildings were sold off. These buildings were used in the camp but were moved to a new location. It's hard to say what they were used for, though. This is one of 2 hospital buildings left standing. The building is still in use, but now it's for storage. The second hospital building has been converted into a home. This structure was one of the commissary safes. It was made with Italian help and remains a solid structure. Finally, we went to go see the U.S. Eagle. It was made by Japanese internees from local colored rocks and has somewhat survived all these decades. The elements have caused its deterioration, one of the few acknowledged remnants of those long-gone days. Overall, I had a great time and I learned a lot. I want to thank Molly Pressler for her help and to say that her and her friends did an outstanding job at the museum. So from this point on, I hit the road again, looking for the next camp along the road to Mejia.